Officials of the United Nations and members of the Presidential Task Force on COVID-19 arrive in the venue for the launch of the United Nations COVID-19 Basket Fund in Abuja. The fund is expected to coordinate all United Nations support for the Presidential Task Force in the fight against COVID-19. Special focus will be on how the fund will help to cushion the harsh effect of the pandemic on the nation's economy and the health sector.
The COVID-19 Basket Fund has been designed to serve within the One COVID Financing and Investment Platform, through which the different stakeholders, i.e. the United Nations, other multilateral and bilateral donors, as well as other key stakeholders, can channel their financial contribution to the multi-sectoral efforts of the Presidential Task Force on COVID-19 response.
Although neither the federal government nor the United Nations representatives is willing to speak on the amount of money for the takeoff, the UN believes strongly that the success of this project will depend largely on the kind of leadership provided by the Nigerian government.
For the response to be effective, it needs to build on Nigerian leadership, your policies, your priorities. Focusing, of course, on the immediate needs, but being aware as well of the impacts for the most vulnerable of our societies.
The federal government expresses appreciation for the gesture.
The One COVID-19 Basket Fund is robust and is capable of rapid procurement of equipment and consumables, as well as supporting socio-economic interventions of the vulnerable groups, as well as efforts aimed at scaling up surveillance, testing, and clinical management of the critically ill.
I believe that the journey is just the beginning. We have a long way to go, and the road will be rough ahead. So we would need all the help you have, particularly the United Nations group, who work all over the world, and particularly with the WHO, to bring the aggregate experience you have from everywhere to bear here.
Nigeria has so far been commended by the World Health Organization for effectively managing the pandemic. This pledge of support from the United Nations is no doubt an additional boost to do even more.
Thanks for staying with us. Now we want to look at the way that this whole thing generally impacts on the economy. You know, we've been talking about all of the interventions of various agencies of government and government itself, the federal government, the CBN, House of Representatives, Senate, organized private sector, and the rest of them. One of the agencies, one of the bodies on the organized private sector has joined us this morning. He is Mansour Ahmed, who is the President, Manufacturers Association of Nigeria and Chairman, Pan-African Manufacturers Association. Thanks for joining us this morning. First of all, what's, in your opinion, is the impact that you think the intervention of government so far, the economic stimulus package and so many other things, what direct impact do you think it's having on your members as we speak?
Well, thank you very much for having me. First of all, I think the major issue today before all of us, of course, is the health issue itself. And so the first impact really is how this COVID-19 and the programs of the federal government will affect the health of our people. Over the past 2 weeks, we have been discussing with the federal government through the Minister of Industries, Trade and Investment, first of all, to see what do we need to do to assure and secure the health of industrial workers. And the first thing, of course, is, like in every other case, is to ensure that our workers will indeed be secure through mainly the guidelines of the NCDC in terms of social distancing and, of course, personal hygiene. And in this regard, of course, we have agreed with the federal government, as indeed has been imposed, that except for companies producing essential commodities that are vital, first for the health needs of a country, and secondly, to ensure that life can go on for the majority of people, that all industrial establishments, except those producing essential commodities and distributing them, will be closed. Now, that obviously will have a huge impact on the manufacturing sector, as I'm sure most people would understand. And as I said, one of the ways we do that is to identify only those industrial establishments that need to be operating in order to ensure that, one, we can get the health needs, we can keep the health needs of the country, and two, that we can continue to produce essential, particularly food items, hygiene items, that will be necessary during the period, especially when there is a lockdown, as we have already in some states. Now, the impact of this is several-fold. First, of course, it will mean a lot of people will be out of work. Secondly, industries will have, even those that are operating, will have huge challenges to ensure that they can remain operational and that their products will be distributed and supplied to the areas of need, especially in an area where, in many cases, main markets have to be closed in order to ensure the social distancing requirement can be met. Thirdly, beyond those industries that are operating, the rest of industries will close down. And obviously, this will have tremendous impact on industrial activity and directly, therefore, on the economy. And we are discussing with the federal government ways in which action can be taken to ameliorate the impact of that. As we would all expect, some industries, if they're closed for we don't know how long, may have difficulty sustaining their operations or even restoring their operations after the period of lockdown or the period of COVID. These are some of the issues that are affecting industries. It will generally have both social as well as economic effect. Social in the sense that we can expect possibility of massive unemployment arising from this. Nigeria is already heavily unemployed, if you like, at around 23%, and the impact of this may well go even beyond that. And the consequence of this, of course, on the economy as a whole and on society could be massive. On the economic side, of course, industries, when they close their operations, will have serious difficulties. For instance, industries that have borrowed money from banks will have difficulty, servicing those debts. Industries that are in the process of
pardon me, one moment. You're also on the point that you just raised about, the effect on manufacturing organizations that may have to close as a result of the lockdown and all of that. Respond to what the House of Representatives is proposing about the first stimulus bill package they are talking about, as well as the CBN, the kind of moratorium, the kind of stimulus package in that House of Representatives bill, saying these are the things that will come to employers who do not, let go of their staff and all of that. And the CBN's, regulations that is making some things available to industries. Isn't that in any way likely to mitigate the effect that you're talking about?
Yes, indeed. Both our request and the bill by the National Assembly actually speak to this issue. For industries that are completely closed down, clearly we will need some stimulus effect to be able to sustain those operations on our payrolls. And our request is that there must be some way in which government will provide some support to industries, perhaps maybe up to 60% of their payroll, in order to be able to keep the workers on their payroll and to keep paying them during this period. The initiatives by the central bank are most welcome. We are waiting for the details of these initiatives, especially regarding facilities which did not fall into the basket of the various stimulus initiatives of the CBN, which at the moment seem to focus on loans and facilities granted by the CBN under the various schemes that they've been operating. We believe that, for instance, this should be extended to companies that have borrowed from the commercial banks, which means, of course, the CBN will now have to take up to subsidize existing interest rates, maybe to perhaps prevail on the commercial banks to restructure some of these loans, maybe create a longer tenor in order to ensure that industries can continue to operate and service these loans. We have indeed, as I said, requested that some of these initiatives be discussed with our members and particularly with the association in order to find ways in which the effect, both economic, social, and long-term, can be ameliorated.
When you say that you've not gotten the details, are you referring to that 1 trillion naira intervention fund, which the CBN governor announced about 3 weeks ago?
Yes, indeed. Yeah. I believe that the details of how this will be implemented will still have to be worked out in detail.
Okay, so you're saying that this money has not even been dispersed perhaps to your members across the country?
To my knowledge, no funds have been dispersed to our members yet. Now, we do understand that these things will take a little while to work out the details because obviously the CBN will provide guidelines, funds that perhaps will go to, as I said, those people, particularly SMEs and so on, who have borrowed from Bank of Industry based on existing CBN initiatives like the Anchor Bros and the Bank of Industry facilities and so on will probably already be available for that. But for industry that have borrowed from commercial banks, I think the details of this will have to be worked out.
Let's just take a moment and join Dr. Charles Omole, who is a legal and political strategist. He joins us via Skype from London, just to get his perspective on these issues this morning. Good morning, and thank you for joining us on the program. Now, there's been a lot of talk from the government, a lot of interventions. I mean, you heard the executive of MAN talking about some of his interventions, how they have not yet gotten some of them. They're still expecting the details. But, you know, that aside, a general overview, the government's approach to this fight against COVID-19. What is your perspective of it?
Thank you. Good morning. Thank you for having me. Well, I would say that government have tried in many respects. COVID-19 is an imponderable that is challenging every country in the world, even in the West. My concern, though, in terms of areas where government can improve in their response, as we just heard the last speaker, there is always this major lag between pronouncement and implementation in Nigeria. COVID-19, it's a pandemic that I think we can't afford to allow that same format to play. For example, in the UK, if you take that as an example, the COVID-19 bill was passed through Parliament and signed into law in 1 day. That shows speed, and that's what we need. At this stage, we shouldn't be talking about a bill that the House of Representatives is thinking about. We should have a bill passed. We should have it signed into law. Certainty should be given to businesses. You know, let me give you a practical example. As of yesterday, based on reports I read, between February and yesterday, 1 million jobs have been lost in the United Kingdom. That's despite the fact that the stimulus package was announced by the government, which guaranteed 80% of the income of all workers. Now, that report was saying that if that stimulus package was not announced when it was announced, the United Kingdom, as of yesterday, would have lost almost 4 million jobs. So announcing it speedily already saved over 3 million jobs that would have been lost. So what Nigerian government needs to understand is this is not the time to pussyfoot around. It's time to, you have a plan, give business certainty. And right now, this announcement of things, and then people who need it don't get it. The National Assembly is passing a bill. They're still discussing it. No bill has been passed. Talk less of being signed into law. That has to end. That's my first observation.
You also, in your article, actually, did you recommend slashing or reducing recurrent expenditure?
Yes, I did. I did. Which is why I was shocked when I read yesterday. I think was it the Minister of Finance that announced that the president has given the go-ahead for the employment of 1,000 people from every local government in the country. So that's almost 740,000 jobs. Government shouldn't be doing that at this stage. That's not what government should be doing, because we're talking about reducing recurrent expenditure and you want to employ just under 1 million people. That is not what the government should be doing. It's not sustainable. The focus should be stimulating the private sector to make sure they don't shed jobs. And if jobs are shared, job shared is kept to a barest minimum. That is what the government should be focusing on right now. And yes, they should be reducing recurrent expenditure.
How do you, because I think there are two different things, reducing recurrent expenditure and then not employing more people to add to the recurrent expenditure. But if you're saying they should reduce recurrent expenditure, how are people going to, because these are salaries of people, so how is that going to work?
No, actually, if you look at the article I made, I made it specific that they should reduce non-salary related recurrent expenditure, was what I specifically said in my article, which means, things like allowances, travel allowance, training allowance, all the budget heads that got lots of money, entertainment allowance, all those things should be cut drastically. So I'm not recommending you should cut jobs. I'm saying all those other things that are recurrent expenditure should be cut. I also said that the capital expenditure should be looked into. I think the challenge here really is we need the government to be a bit more open with Nigerians. To win the confidence of Nigerians, government needs certain level of credibility. Even Donald Trump, as whatever criticism you give of him, has said that despite signing a $2 trillion intervention fund and all the activities the government is doing in the United States, he said he still expects about 200,000 Americans to die of this disease in the United Kingdom. The Prime Minister said last week or 2 weeks ago that despite all the intervention of government, that about 20,000 British citizens will still die. But the question is, what are we doing? What is the estimate in Nigeria? What is government looking at? What are we saying is the worst case scenario if government does nothing? If government does this, what will it do in terms of fatality? So we need a bit more openness from government rather than too much secrecy, I think, in my opinion.
Talked about the jobs. Well, according to the Minister of Finance, that 500 billion naira intervention fund, the crisis intervention fund, is meant to go into state and local governments such that they would create 1,000 jobs per local government. So it's not like the government is planning to employ people. These intervention funds are meant to create jobs, as it were. But that aside, now we're looking at a point where we need to raise funds. You see, the government has looked to the IMF, the World Bank, saying we need to borrow monies from these institutions. But then you see, the Fitch has also downgraded Nigeria's credit ratings. So the question is, in the midst of this, where do we turn to for this much needed cash?
Well, the challenge is, that is the conundrum. That's a major problem Nigeria has. And that's why I'm saying that every government is being criticized worldwide. No government ever does enough. And that's why I say you have to give government some credit for attempting to address this somehow. But in terms of where the cash come from, it's going to be a hard road. And my view is decisions taken now during the pandemic will affect the trajectory of the post-pandemic difficulties we are going to face. Like the previous speaker was saying, if companies have shut down, they've shed jobs, what happens after the pandemic is over? It's going to be much more difficult to restart those factories, to re-employ new people. So we have to begin to look at how, right now, government has to, cut things drastically. You know, in my article, I was talking about, for example, money meant 37 billion meant for renovation of National Assembly. That can easily be scrapped for now. There's so many allocations for what I call white elephant projects within the federal government budget that needs to be scrapped at the moment. And we need to deal with the essential and tighten our belt, so to speak. Jobs should be our number one priority. Some of the fiscal, incentive they're talking about in terms of taxation and all that, it's good. But the challenge is a company needs to be in production, needs to have sold the product, needs to have made profits before it can pay tax. So giving me a tax incentive doesn't really solve the problem if I have a problem with production. So it's key, therefore, that government, number one, cuts its clothes according to its cloth, drastically become more nimble. And that needs to be demonstrated from all arms of government. So they can't be living large and expect Nigerians to cut, to go through austere. So we are going to face a period of austerity in the coming months and years, and government needs to be realistic about that.
Let me take this back to Abuja, where we have the president of the Manufacturers Association of Nigeria, Mr. Ahmed. First of all, you've listened to him, and a number of people would, as you would agree, there's a lot of focus on the federal government, and of course, from the slide that we showed you earlier, the federal government through the Minister of Finance talking about that 500 billion naira package, and the states are supposed to get some moratorium and create some jobs. How do you react to that? Do you think that will help, your association in any specific way?
Yes. Well, there's no doubt that these are going to be very difficult times. And knowing already the structure of our economy, the states really, yes, they can help. They can do a lot of things, particularly in terms of generating employment. They themselves will really have to forego a lot of taxes that they're imposing on their citizens and cut down on expenditure, as the gentleman has said. But the bulk of the burden really has to be borne by the federal government. And you ask, where will the resources be coming from? This is a very good question. At a time when our main source of income, the oil revenues, is probably being cut down by 30–40%, clearly government is going to be really in difficulty. And of course, the fact that factories and the country is being locked down means that other sources of revenue, like taxes, will also be significantly reduced. We ourselves have said that, for instance, the government needs to roll back the implementation of the VAT, because we have to also find a way of putting more money in the pocket of citizens and workers, so that they can also be able to buy their daily needs and boost demand, which is also necessary for the factories to operate. Now, how do the states operate? Like I said, I believe that, first of all, the states themselves must recognize that they have a role, first, to do whatever they can to provide not necessarily jobs as such, because I honestly do not see states and local governments providing a large number of jobs, except manual jobs and so on, which may still be useful, but they have to cut down on expenditure to create resources that they can inject in, for instance, in hospitals, in the healthcare system, which is another area that massive investments is going to be needed at both the federal and state level. So the situation is not easy. This is going to be very complex and particularly unpredictable, because we don't know how long this thing is going to work. And we just have to be innovative in the way we find solutions. I believe that, for instance, beyond the internal resources and the resources that government has, we also must look to the international financial institutions to support particularly countries like ours very massively. Our country is going to be hit doubly, first by the effect of the COVID, as we have said, and also by the effect of the massive reduction in oil revenues. We have already seen oil going down to as low as $13 per barrel. It's come up now, but my projection is that it's probably going to remain well below $50 per barrel for a long time, probably for the whole of the year. And that means, of course, we really have to look at our budget, as indeed is being done now, and make massive adjustments in order to be able to survive. But like the gentleman said, I think we must keep our mind beyond just surviving through the COVID period. We must also look at how do we restore our economy. The general feeling is that this COVID is going to probably push us back into recession, and nobody would say for how long. So clearly, the way forward is going to be very thorny. It's going to be very, very difficult.
Ms.
And
Ahmed,
we need real.
We're going to come back to you
initiatives.
when we return, but we need to just ask a question of Doctor, so that we can let him go. Dr. Omole, you, yes, in your article did also suggest that we must not allow this virus get to the poorest of the poor because it will spread rapidly and we may not be able to curtail it. But with respect to the states, what do we do about what they bring to the table, more so in terms of resources?
Well, I mean, like the gentleman actually said, I mean, one of the key things the states can do is to make sure these many levies and taxes and charges they levy on businesses, they should lift it during this period. That's number one. So to make it lighter for the business. Number two, states need to be more coordinated. These disparate, different, policies among states, gives me concern. They should coordinate among themselves so that we have a level of consistency in terms of interventions and activities, by the different states rather than the way it's been done. And number three, states need to understand that a total lockdown of the economy, like Nigeria, that is more manual, subsistence and manufacturing based is difficult. In an economy like United Kingdom, where it is 70% service industry based, you can work from home very readily. So apart from the fact that there is no infrastructure to support such distance working in Nigeria, the practicality of it just means many people can't work from home. So lockdown should be looked at from the way other countries have done it, like Senegal. They did partial lockdown, which is only at night. And if you look at the trajectory of COVID-19, there are countries like South Korea that did not have any shutdown at all. No national lockdown. Even their cinemas are still open as I speak. And yet they were able to arrest the trajectory of the pandemic in the country. And we have countries that have total lockdown. Okay. Are also able to do it. So there are different strategies for different countries. We shouldn't just be doing cut and pasting, is my point.
That will be a very interesting one. The cinemas open and then they were still able to contain it. Even though the governors here keep complaining about funds, access to more resources, but we'll see how that plays out. Thank you very much indeed for your time today, Dr. Charles Omole, legal and political strategist. We'll be back in a moment and still ask questions of Mr. Ahmed, so join us again.